So today, it's going to be a whirlwind. All right, so first thing that we're going to do is talk a little bit about what we've covered so far. So on day one, we went through an introduction, right? What is coaching? What is therapy? And how do we understand what gets in the way of our clients achieving their goals? Oh, I need to screen share with y'all. There we go. And so what we kind of came to is this, diagram of this is their intent. This is the resistance they have to overcome. And then once they overcome their resistance, they're prone to take action. And so on day one, we sort of went over an overview of this model. And the key takeaways from the overview of this model are that the reason that people can't find motivation is because they use one term. Oh, I'm unmotivated, right? But the truth is that motivation involves a number of different physiologic, psychologic, neuroscientific, spiritual, behavioral, economics. There are lots of different disciplines that go into what motivation is. And the reason people stay stuck is because they don't have the precision to figure out, where is my problem? Is it a problem of intent? Am I not do I not really want it? Or am I conflicted? Am I ambivalent? Is there a part of me that should get up at 8 a.m. every day, but there's a part of me that wants to stay up till 4 a.m. every day? So that internal conflict makes their intent kind of scrambled, so they can't really act. Is the problem resistance? So even if I really want to do something, and my best example of this is people who are very, very lonely. So people who are very, very lonely will want to make friends, will want to find a romantic partner, will want all of these things, and their intent is 100%. They want it more than anything else in the world, and yet they still can't do it. So if we kind of diagnose that person's motivational problem, what we'll probably uncover is that there's resistance. So there's some amount of shame that they experience, some amount of identity problems that they have. So if we kind of talk about resistance, there's two components to it. There's emotions and identity. There are other things as well, but that's kind of how we break it up. And so how can you as a coach, even if their intent is fully clarified, how can you help them overcome their resistance? And so today we're going to kind of talk about, I think, the nuts and bolts of what most people expect from goal setting and motivation, which is the action. And the key point here is that a lot of people come in and they want to jump right towards their goals, but it's been my experience, and hopefully y'all have seen this too, I'm pretty sure y'all have, that people who focus on the action right away without focusing on the obstacle and the energy going into their goals are the ones that tend to get blindsided and feel stuck because they're oh, I know what I need to do, but I can't bring myself to do it. And then they go and keep on looking for magical solutions to their problems. But they don't need a magical solution. What they need to do is fix the problem to begin with, right? They need to remove the resistance. They need to remove the obstacles. So now what we're going to focus on is actually how to set an appropriate action and how to help your clients succeed in the goals that they set. And today we're going to cover 4 things. We're going to talk about setting a goal. We're going to talk about science a little bit and evidence-based or scientifically validated points or understandings that will help your clients achieve their goals. So there are lots of different psychological principles and other things at play that we can kind of leverage to optimize a client actually achieving their goal. Then we're going to talk about troubleshooting goals. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is give y'all a good, solid cognitive framework to think about the dimensions of a goal so that you can try to figure out where a problem within a goal exists. Questions? Okay, so let's jump in. So, setting a goal. How do most clients set goals?
They look at what other people are doing.
Very good, right? So monkey see, monkey do. What else?
They have a desire to sort of achieve something.
Okay. So let's say that my goal is based on achievement, right? Is that fair to say, Kent?
Yep.
So I know this sounds kind of weird, but when we use the word goal, what we're kind of focusing on is the end of the road, the achievement. right? So like if I have a goal, like what's like a goal is like, I want to become an Olympic gold medalist. That's the achievement, right? Most of the time when our clients think about like goals, they set it based on the target. So it's like a target focus. Fair? End of the road. Where do you think goals, what else? Like where else do your clients' goals come from? Any other ideas?
Sometimes there are consequences of their current behavior and they want to change it.
What do you mean by that, Eli?
Like I guess sometimes, like I have a few clients who maybe want to lose weight because of, you know, what it's like to be physically active. And so they like set a goal to be more fit.
Can you help me understand how they decided to set the goal to be more fit?
I guess to add on to Eli's point, wouldn't it be like reaching like a certain like emotional feeling, like happiness?
Okay. So sometimes they're chasing a feeling, or there's like a correlation with their goal. Like that's kind of a good point. So like, I think that if I get promoted, I will be happy. Is that a good way to put it? If I'm, you know, all of my life would be better if I got jaw surgery and made my jaw extend further from my face. And then I could be a strong-jawed male, right? So like they're sort of, their goal correlates with what's actually, their goal correlates with their values, but it's not directly chasing the value. It's like chasing some approximation of the value. It's an excellent point. Okay. So I think the key thing here is that a lot of clients will set goals based on what they see other people do, you know, what that target is, and they may even attribute some inappropriate things to that target. So this is like grass is greener on the other side. Right? So the first thing that I kind of want to point out is that like goal setting is not a systematic or thought out process. It's not methodical at all. It's just sort of like they wake up one day and they're like, oh, this is what I should do. Right? And all of the societal conditioning and stuff kind of comes in. So the first thing that we can help people do in terms of coaching is to set an appropriate goal. We can actually use a systematic process to set the right kinds of goals for our clients and help them achieve it. And our first kind of approach to setting a goal is the 25% rule. And so what we kind of say is, here's where our clients are, here's where they want to go, so here's the goal. And so what clients try to do is they try to think, okay, how do I get from here to here? Which makes perfect sense. That's the nature of a goal, right? If this is like Olympic gold medal, like of course they're going to think about how do I get to an Olympic gold medal. But the problem is that this approach does not scientifically kind of set us up for success. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to ask them, okay, between where you are and where you want to go, what's the halfway point between that? And then what's the halfway point between that? And this is usually the first general target that we want to set. And there are a lot of things that we're engaging by doing this process. The first is that our brain has this circuit that sort of, you know, measures progress towards something. And it's able to tell that, like, okay, if I work out today, how close am I to achieving my goal? Not very close at all. And so when the gap between what I'm capable of and what I want to achieve is wide, it decreases motivation. Right? So I'm curious, do any of y'all like want to be president of the United States? Like, who thinks it would be cool to be president?
I think it would be pretty cool.
Right? So like, why don't you strive for it every day, Brian?
Because that's really hard and very abstract process.
Absolutely, right? So what we see is that the gap between what you believe you're capable of, or the actions you can take and what you want to achieve, actually decreases motivation. So the first thing that we're going to do is like shrink the goal like to the first target. So there's also like positive psychology and things like that are involved here. So when we shrink the first target, you know, we increase the likelihood of positive reinforcement. right? We kind of open ourselves up to like being successful and like all kinds of other stuff. So I'm going to ask y'all, so maybe you guys know. So if I were to tell one of my clients, hey, I know you have this goal over here, but why don't we start over here? What is your client going to say? What's their resistance to it?
It's not enough, or it's not important.
Beautiful. Not enough. So we're going to get that, okay? We just want to table that, Eli. We'll talk about how to deal with that in a second, okay? So the first thing that we want to do is set a reasonable goal, okay? And the 25% rule is kind of how to sort of frame it. I think this is a goal that we also really discovered worked very well in our parent coaching program. So there are a bunch of parents who feel like their kids are addicted to video games. And so they came to us and they said, oh my God, can you fix our children? Can I sign them up for coaching? And we said, no, your kid isn't the problem. You need to sign up for coaching. And some parents get really, really upset with that. They're like, they're the one who's playing video games all day. And I'm like, you're their parent. If they're doing something all day, it's your fault. I don't say it in that way, but our parent coaching program, we don't work with the kids, we work with the parents. And the first thing that we do is help the parents understand that the goals that you want to achieve, you want your kid to start running track and never play video games and do all their chores and be home for like show up at the table and set the table and eat dinner. Like they're not going to do that, right? That's a completely inappropriate goal for you to set. Let's meet the kid where they're at. What does the kid want? What do they care about? You know, what are they capable of? And so in terms of setting this goal, like there's a couple of good techniques that you can use that can get people to buy in a little bit. So, you know, you can ask questions like, you know, where can you start? So this is kind of emphasizing this point instead of this point. Okay. So like asking a client, so if they say, oh, it wouldn't be enough, focusing on the start sort of dismantles the not enough somewhat. Does that make sense? Because then it's not like there's no enough if you're just talking about where to start. Enough has to do with hitting your target. It doesn't have to do with like where you are. It has to do with where you want to go. Does that make sense? So you can kind of ask clients where you can start, and then you can also ask them like, you know, what did you do over the last week? So you want to sort of emphasize where they are. Right? So if someone wants to like diet, for example, or lose weight or whatever, you know, if someone wants to find a new job, you can kind of ask them, okay, what did you do over the last week in terms of like moving towards this goal? And chances are they'll say nothing because they haven't started on the goal yet, right? Which is kind of fine. So you kind of approach them with a little bit of like compassion. And then you could say, okay, that's totally fine. So if you didn't work on it last week, so this is your baseline. Kind of telling them this is your baseline. Okay? And kind of cognitively, I know it's kind of weird, but people don't do this, right? They don't sort of think about where they are is their baseline. They think about where they are is a negative. Does that make sense, like cognitively? So that cognitive shift is incredibly important, right? So like instead of the gap of like in the negative numbers, you know, this is kind of where they are. So all they see is a deficit, whereas like this line actually belongs here because that's where you're starting. So you can sort of set this out as your baseline and then kind of ask the question, you know, what's the, like, and you can kind of get back to where can you start? But you can sort of ask the question like, you know, what's one step you can take? Above the baseline. Right? So this is where like, once you frame shift to the baseline of where they are, it adjusts their expectations. So using these techniques like does a lot of things like adjust expectations, which correlates with increased success. It also has a present focus, which correlates with increased success. It meets people where they're at. Which correlates with increased success. It models acceptance for them about where they are. And this also leads to increased success. So what we're going to use is use this kind of frame shift and use some of these techniques to recruit several principles that are correlated with better outcomes. Questions about that? Okay, so just to give you all a kind of a quick example. So, let's say, okay, I want to get healthy. All right, what did you do last week? I didn't exercise at all, and I ate, I ordered Uber Eats every day. Okay, so let's take that as your baseline. So it sounds like you've got a long way to go. You want to kind of acknowledge, right? You want to acknowledge their goal. You want to acknowledge the gap. You want to acknowledge the feeling of not enough. Then you can say, okay, where do you think is so for someone who doesn't exercise and kind of is eating out every day, what do you think would be a reasonable goal for that person to start? What do you think is the first step they need to do? And then this is where your client will say, well, I guess they need to start working out every day. And it's no, I don't think that's reasonable. Do you think that someone who didn't work out 0 days in the last week can start working out every single day? And then you kind of they're no, well, I don't think that that's really possible. So okay, so what do you think is possible? Do you think working out a single day is possible for this person? All right, let's try. Let's see what happens. I understand that it feels like it's not going to be enough to you, and frankly, it's not going to be enough. Let's just acknowledge that. But what's enough and what you're capable of are two different things. Where you want to go and what your baseline is are two different things. Okay? Y'all get that? So what we're going to do is set our goal at 25% of where they want to go, and then, or maybe even smaller, and then sort of have this kind of discussion of where their baseline is, defining their baseline, and moving upward from the baseline. And that sort of recruits positive reinforcement and being successful instead of this gap between what they're capable of and what they want to achieve, and will positively enhance our motivation. It also has the added benefits of adjusting expectations, helping people retain a present focus. So people will ask the question, how do I stay focused in the present? It's not something you can do, right? You don't just stay focused in the present. As a coach, what you're going to do is model a certain kind of behavior that forces them to be in the present. And then their brain will learn, oh, this is how I stay in the present. They're not even going to realize that it's happening to them. But over time, they will start to be more present focused as you direct them to be to force them into the present by sort of focusing on baseline instead of goals. It meets people where they're at, which I think you guys all understand the value of. And then it also does things like models acceptance, right? You're not judging them for their baseline. You're kind of saying, oh, so you don't work out at all and you eat out every day. Okay, that's where we're going to start. You're not spending the next 15 minutes beating them up about how they could do better or how they're pathetic or whatever. So you're going to start to adjust their self-talk by modeling acceptance. Okay? So that's how we set a goal. Questions before we move on? Okay. Evidence-based goal setting. Section number 2. So there are a number of different kind of scientific principles that we can kind of leverage to optimize how to set a goal, okay? So number 1 is advice giving and why not to do it. Number 2 is going to be operationalizing and understanding the frontal lobe. Number 3 is going to be Dunning-Kruger. So these are going to be the 3 things that we're going to focus on. So the first is when you give people advice, how effective is it?
It's not very effective.
Absolutely, right? So why is that? Y'all know?
I think because the advice we give them doesn't take any context of their situation.
Okay, very good. Right? So
Oftentimes invalidating.
Yep. So advice can be invalidating. It doesn't it doesn't seem to land, right? So presenting people with information, we've talked about explicit memory and implicit memory and all that good stuff. So the other problem with advice giving is that it tends to be like a gut reaction. So the other thing about goal setting that most people tend to do is that it's like a gut reaction. They wake up one day and they're like, I need to get in shape, right? They just sort of set this arbitrary goal. So there's evidence that shows that instead of giving people a solution, if you want to engage them in behavior, give them a choice. So choice is greater than advice or solutions. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but this is just a very simple technique, which there's been a ton of research on, which is like if someone wants to lose weight, if you tell them, okay, let's develop an exercise plan, that is not as likely to succeed as if you ask them, hey, so if you want to lose weight, do you think a dietary approach would be better or like an exercise approach would be better? And then if they say exercise approach, and then you kind of run down that, like that will actually be more likely to succeed. Even if you give them the answer at the beginning, giving them the answer at the beginning and letting them choose the answer is actually like leads to different outcomes, even though you both settle on the same answer, which is kind of weird, right? Because generally speaking, when we think about the success of an endeavor, we think the endeavor is what results in success. So if I exercise, I will lose weight. If I don't, but the really interesting thing about human psychology is how you get to the conclusion of exercise actually drastically affects your outcome in terms of whether you're successful or not. And so this is also where we're going to draw on Nobel Prize winning economist Daniel Kahneman. And so remember that where do goals come from? Monkey see, monkey do. Right? Where goals come from is our gut. So human beings do not engage in a methodical process of designing goals. They just rely on their gut. It's driven by emotion or their goals or what they see by other people. And so this is called type 1 reasoning, which is the big discovery that Daniel Kahneman made. And the interesting thing about choice is that choice starts to recruit type 2 reasoning. And what Kahneman kind of realized is that human beings have two ways that they make decisions. One is type 1, which is like gut. So this is like easy to do, and it feels very logical. So a good example of this is if you look at like research on advertising. If I put a display of Oreos like front and center in like a grocery store, and then someone purchases Oreos, and then I ask that person, why did you buy the Oreos? What are they going to say?
It was in front of me.
That's actually incorrect. They will never say that.
They'll say it's because they wanted them?
Absolutely. The reason, so Kent, you're map hacking, bro. The reason they bought it is because it was in front of them. But the reason they think they bought it is because of something that feels very logical. This is a big discovery that map hacking can. This is a big discovery that Daniel Kahneman made, is that people make gut reactions, but they think that their gut reactions are well thought out. So an example of type 2 reasoning is differential diagnosis. So generally speaking, type 2 reasoning is cognitive, it's intense, and it feels bad. People don't enjoy doing it. They actually don't enjoy being like logical or methodical. So literally what we have to do with doctors is we have to spend years, like literally years of cognitive training for them to go from this to this. So generally speaking, a doctor usually has a hypothesis about what's wrong with a patient within 5 minutes of like seeing the patient, sometimes even less. Like you kind of got an idea of like what's going on. But what we spend years actually training is to not trust our gut and start to be systematic in the way that we approach patients. And that's how we don't miss things, okay? Because there's a lot of really interesting research as well about, why family members shouldn't be physicians, because it's hard for family members to do type 2 reasoning with your family. It's hard for physicians to do type 2 reasoning with their family. So the interesting thing about type 2 reasoning is that this leads to better results, but it feels really hard. It's like cognitively very intense. When, if you're studying and you find studying boring, that's like an example of like type 2 reasoning. It's a bit of a stretch there, but all of the activities that human beings find like cognitively cumbersome or boring tend to be closer to type 2 reasoning. And the real tricky thing that also Kahneman discovered is that everyone thinks they operate from here. Everyone thinks they operate from here, but most people actually operate from here. Most of our decisions, like when you think about what you want to eat today, You don't sit down with a chart of all possible foods and do calculations about caloric inputs and vitamin needs and like all this kind of stuff. It's sort of like, I kind of feel like eating this. Right? If you think about your grocery shopping, like you may have a list, but where did that list come from? It wasn't a list of all possible things that you could eat. It was sort of like, okay, we need more of this. Well, where did that idea come from? Well, the fruit bowl is empty, so we need more bananas. Like, it's all just random-ass, gut-oriented, non-methodical thinking. This is also where advice comes from, right? So, like, if you think about it, and someone gives you advice, you know, if you talk to someone about your problems, how much time do they spend thinking about what's the best advice they could get? It's a fluid conversation. They spend all of, like, 2 seconds, if even that, right? They listen to you for a while, and they're like, hey, I think you should do this. Even I do that. So what I present on stream most of the time when I'm doing Q&A is type 1 reasoning. It's just like my gut. So you can refine your gut over time, and we'll kind of get to that. But this lecture is type 2 reasoning. It took a long time for me to like write out, right? So I have like a whole script. I sat down, I can answer questions about motivation, but if I actually want to offer like a complete educational experience, I have to do type 2 reasoning, and it takes me like 6 or 8 hours. Whereas, like, I could just show up and talk about motivation. That's easy peasy, lemon squeezy, done. Y'all with me? So, here's how we're going to help our clients. We're going to engage in type 2 reasoning by giving them a choice. So you as a coach are going to ask open-ended questions. Okay, so if our target is weight, okay, someone give me a target that I can run through for the whole lecture. What's a target? What's something that people want to do?
What do you mean by target?
Just like, what's a goal that someone will come in on? Like, okay, I'm going to take one from chat. It's workout. Okay? This is our target. So what are the questions that we could ask people is, you know, we could ask people, okay, like, what are the ways in which you could work out? Okay, so we're going to start with like an open-ended question. And then they're going to give you a couple of answers. Cause like most of the time when people say workout, like they're going to jump straight to like, I need to go to the gym every day. Y'all see that? It's like automatic. There's not even like what are my options? And then they say like even asking that question is going to lead to like, I suspect a small like improvement in outcomes. Okay, so they could say I can go to the gym. I can work out at home. I can go for a run. So you want to generate as many options as you can, okay? I could work out with friends. I could do push-ups while I'm waiting in queue for a game, right? And so like you want to generate as many options as you can. And then I know it sounds kind of weird, and then you just repeat the options back, and you're like, which one do you think, which one do you want to try? So already in this process, like maybe the gym sucks. Like sure, that's what other people do, right? Like other people go to the gym, but I have a ton of social anxiety. I'm going to feel ashamed of myself. So that may be a terrible idea. But like that person, without your help, they're going to have this goal. They're going to come up with a solution based on type 1 reasoning, and they're going to stay stuck forever and never work out. That's why people want to work out and don't work out, because they don't go through this process. So just by generating this process, we begin to see, okay, this is what your individual preferences are. What do you want to try? And they can say, okay, I want to try working out at home. Okay, so you've already won there. Like that's already better than like what most people do. So the next thing that we want to do is just like kind of refine that choice over time, right? So like, what could you do at home? Right? They're like, oh, I guess I could do like push-ups. I could do yoga. I could do parkour, you know, like whatever, like they can come up with whatever like stuff they want. And we'll kind of get to the different dimensions of goal setting at the end. But the key point here is that you want to give them a choice, because when people make a choice, and y'all remember from the stages of change model, this is why planning and action are actually like scientifically or psychologically discrete steps. They're not the same. Planning and action is the one that most clients like don't realize are actually cognitively discrete steps. So this is all planning phase. Okay, from stages of change model. And so this is how you work with someone in the planning phase. You give them a menu of options. And then what happens when you give them a menu is they're going to gravitate towards the most likely scenarios and sort of set themselves up for the most success. Okay? Questions about giving people choices instead of advice?
One question. So does this evidently lead to like a solution for the client?
Yep. Yes. Right?
Okay.
So like this is going to end up with a plan. Like instead of jumping straight from I want to work out to the gym, this is going to be like, okay, you're going to do yoga every morning. And then you're going to do push-ups while queuing for a League of Legends game while you're waiting for Fortnite queue. Okay? Like that's how you develop a plan. And this is going to be like more attainable for them. And we'll get to, why this, for example, probably won't work. But anyway. So the second thing that we're going to do, so this will lead to a plan, but it's one of the steps of planning, Brian. So the second step of planning is operationalizing. Do you guys know what operationalizing a problem is? You all heard that term before?
Like breaking it down.
Yep, breaking it down. What does that do for us?
Makes things concrete.
Yep. How does that help?
Well, now they're not abstract and you can actually do them because something abstract is essentially like insurmountable.
Okay, very good. Right? So you can't take abstract action. I can't get into shape. It isn't possible. Welcome, Forrest, by the way. Bro, how you been?
Surviving and thriving.
Awesome, dude. Good to see you. What else? Well, how else would y'all describe operationalizing?
It kind of increases the amount of achievable steps there are in
Absolutely. Achievable steps. Okay? So we have this part of our brain called the frontal lobe. All right? And the frontal lobe is good at operationalizing. So I don't know if you guys kind of know this, but like when some kids apply to college, their parents help them manage the application process. Y'all familiar with that? So let me ask you something. Why does the kid need the parent to help them with the application process? And how is it that the parent is able to help them with the application process to begin with? Right? Why can't the kid just do it on their own? Just apply to college, easy.
Well, isn't it because like two things, like one, they never applied to college, and two, I guess they don't understand like the actual process of like following through with that decision?
Yeah, right? So it's really interesting because like maybe the parents have applied, but not always. And then the second thing is that like the parents may have some ability to like understand the process. So we have this part of our brain called the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is responsible for executive function. And what executive function means is the ability to plan and execute tasks. So it's like literally this ability to operationalize. So if I look at, so this is kind of my favorite example, but it applies to college and stuff too. So if I tell a 2-year-old to clean her room, she can't do that. I can ask her to put her books away, so she can do that, but she can't clean her room. Because cleaning her room is an abstract process, and based on what her frontal lobe is capable of, as an adult, I have to break it down into books, toys, and pencils. Right? And even if you look at the brain of a 1-year-old, they can't even put away the pencils, but I can tell them, hey, here's a pencil, can you go put it in the box? So like putting things in boxes. Right? So if we look at what's the difference between an adult and a kid, maybe it's experience, but it may not even be experience. It's just that an adult has a fully developed frontal lobe, so they can take this abstract process of applying to college and like divide it into chunks and give their kid like a chunk that they can manage. And so if we talk about, like a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old, a 10-year-old can clean their room, right? And even like, well, theoretically, because I imagine we have a lot of people, myself included, who don't have clean rooms. So even sometimes adults can't clean rooms. So this is the process of executive function. So one of the ways that you can help people succeed is like, if I tell a 2-year-old to clean their room, they're going to fail. Like they're destined to failure. So as a coach, you can help someone by operationalizing for them. Operationalizing is a very cognitively intensive task that, once again, is like, difficult for people to do. They may think they can do it. They may beat themselves up for, because they should be able to do it, but they may actually be hard. It may be hard to do. And this is something that's also a little bit theoretical. I don't know there's actually good science behind this. But in my experience, gamers especially are very bad at operationalizing problems. So if you look at video games, all of the operationalizing has been done for you, right? There's part 1 of the main quest, part 2 of the main quest, part 3 of the main quest, part 4 of the main quest, part 5 of the main quest, and then there's the final boss. So gamers excel a lot. They actually do really well with something that I call close-ended problem solving, which is when they're given a discrete task and all of the tools necessary. Okay, so if I tell a gamer, hey, I want you to build a car out of tape, they'll actually be able to do that. You give them a task with the goal very clear and all of the pieces laid out. It's basically like they're good at assembling Legos, right? They're awesome at Legos because you could tell them, hey, I want you to build, a tree with Legos. They can do that. Maybe even superior to the average population, by the way. What they're bad at is open-ended problem solving, which is things like getting into college. Right? Because what are the pieces of that? I don't really know. Where do I apply to? I don't really know. Do I apply nationally, internationally? I don't know. I don't know where to start with that. So as a coach, one of the key things that you can help them do is convert an open-ended problem into a closed-ended problem. You want to act as their frontal lobe and break an abstract task into achievable steps. Right? And so we kind of did this right here. Do y'all see that? This is actually operationalizing for them. Okay, so you're going to do yoga every morning. Notice how I defined AM over here. So how did I get that? It's because I'm going to ask another question. When could you do yoga? Right? So this is how we're going to operationalize and break the task apart. So this week, what you're going to do, you're not going to find a job. This week, what you're going to do is, we may even say something like make your resume, but that's even too abstract. This week, what you're going to do is Google 3 different resume templates, take a look at them, and decide which one you want to use. Then what you're going to do is you're going to replace the demographic information at the top. So you're going to replace the John Smith at the top with your actual name and your address. And then what you're going to do is grab a piece of paper and write down all of the things that you think could belong on the resume. That's your task for the week, right? It's 2 or 3 tasks, but they're super simple. If you really think about it, it takes less than half an hour. And then next week, they've already started editing their resume. At least the top part is done. The next week, it's going to be translating what they put on their piece of paper onto the resume. And once you do that, then we're going to look at your resume together and we're going to try to figure out, okay, how can we make this sound good? So you're going to take one task on your resume and you're going to try to sell it in some way. So for example, if you were president of your esports gaming association in college, right? How can we buff that up some? So you can state that, and then you can say, I increased membership over 300%, over the course of 1 year. Organized a $50,000 charity tournament and organized 200 students into, organized an event that involved sponsors, 200 students, and all that kind of stuff. So you're demonstrating on your resume, president of esports org, what does that mean? Is that a thing? But when you start listing things out that an employer will be oh wow, so this person can get stuff done. This is actually pretty cool. They organized an event. Okay, so you may have to help them a little bit with there, and that may be a little bit tricky in terms of resume building. But do you all see how the key thing is breaking apart the pieces of making a resume? Is that clear? So you want to operationalize out their task as best as possible. When you do that, the chances of them being able to succeed will be a lot better. Key other things, so when we talk about achievable steps, that also, helps us, where is it? Where's positive reinforcement? There it is. Right? So we get a plus there and we get a plus there as you kind of do these things. Okay? So we're going to help them with their frontal lobes. The cool thing is, as you engage in this process with them, over time, you're engaging in type 2 reasoning, which will, over time, actually become type 1 reasoning. Okay? So then they'll actually get automatic at doing this kind of stuff. They'll be able to break apart tasks for themselves. So the first time I teach my kid how to clean up their room, I have to like direct them, right? But as they practice, their brain is able to operationalize that task. And I could even take them to a house they've never been to, and I could say, clean up this room, and they could do it. Make sense? So that's the second thing that we're going to kind of focus on, or second principle that we can leverage. So now we're going to move on to number 3, which is Dunning-Kruger. So Dunning-Kruger graph has, so this is unconscious. This is competence, right? So I may be misattributing this. So generally speaking, we start up here where we're unconsciously incompetent. And at the end, we end up, this may not be Dunning-Kruger actually. I think it relates to Dunning-Kruger, and up here, we sort of end up with unconscious competence. I'm a natural, right? And if we think about playing a video game, like, there are times where you suck and you intentionally try to get better. And your brain is like doing the cognitive work. So, and then over time, so this is conscious incompetence. And then we move over here to conscious competence. Right? That's what this is over here. And then eventually we move up to unconscious competence. And then it becomes easy. So we're a natural over here. Over here, we're oblivious. So one of the key things, this is a little bit more anecdotal or based on my own experience, but I think our goal, so a lot of people, when they think about achieving their goals, what they want to do is they want to go from here to here, right? This is where you start. I suck. I don't know how to work out. This is me working out every day. I think our job as a coach is not actually to move along this axis. Our job as a coach is to push people down here. What we want them to do is to start thinking about it, right? So what we really want to emphasize is like conscious thought process. We want to emphasize type 2 reasoning. We want to emphasize being methodical. We want to emphasize being critical of your process. We want to emphasize problem solving in a very organized and conscious way. This is being thoughtful, being mindful, being present, all that crap. So one of the key things that this process does, right, is we ask people these like different kinds of questions and things like that, is we're making the process of goal setting become conscious. So you don't know how to set a good goal. That's fine. Even after asking you a few questions, you're going to be down here. You're still not going to know how to set a good goal, right? You may come up with push-ups while queuing, but who the fuck does push-ups while queuing? No one. Come on, that's ridiculous, right? The point, though, is not that these are going to succeed. We'll get there in a second when it comes to troubleshooting goals and iteration and all that kind of stuff. The point of doing this exercise is that people are going to be thinking about it in a critical and calculating way. That's ultimately what leads to success in goal setting, is bringing things from the unconscious to the conscious. And now that we're aware of the problem, right? Because remember that most of our problems are lying dormant. They're invisible. We can't detect them, and then we can't deal with them. Y'all know this through coaching, right? This is what the emotional catharsis is. Y'all have done this with all of your clients, where you've helped them understand something in a way that they didn't understand anymore. And that understanding precedes change. So we know this. You guys already know how to do this process, I suspect. Just keep doing what you're doing. And once it's conscious, then we can start acting on it, right? You don't go from here to here. You don't go from here to here. You go from here to here. Then you start being successful. But being successful involves being conscious first. Then you become successful, and then it becomes easy. Then you get to the person who's in shape, and you ask them, how hard is it for you to work out? And they say, it's not that hard. It's natural for me. And this is where everyone wants to go. But since all of our clients want to go from here to here, they want to actually ignore where the money happens. This is where change happens. Change happens down here, not up here. And as long as they keep on doing this, they're doomed to failure. So your job as a coach is to help them become conscious. Even if they fail, be conscious. Be conscious of your failure, because that's what's going to help you succeed. Questions about that? Okay. Now we're going to move on to number 3 on our big topics, which is troubleshooting goal setting. Okay. So what are the problems with the goals? This is an open-ended question, kind of read my mind question. What are the problems with the goals that our clients set? What are the different kinds of challenges they have with goal setting? Let's don't even think about what they set. What are the problems that when clients come in, what are their challenges around like setting goals, or just okay. Chat's helping me out.
Expectations. Oh.
What does that mean, expectations?
They have like a higher like expected outcome based on their actions.
Okay. So very good. So they're going to have overly ambitious goals. What else?
Maybe goals that don't really align with their values.
Very good. Misdirected goals. What else? The last one is remarkably common and also really easy to miss, because I may be setting it up to fail. They lack goals, right? We see this too, where someone comes in and they're like, I don't even know where to start. There's no point anymore, right? So we still have to think about that person in terms of goal setting. Like we owe it to that person to help them find an appropriate goal. Okay, so here's the problem that we run into with goals, is that some people lack goals to begin with, and they don't know where to start. How should we deal with the person who lacks goals? What do y'all think?
Maybe kind of try and understand them a little bit more, try and get a feel for like what they want to do.
Absolutely, right? So like this is where we just need to understand them. So before we figure out where we want to go, let's like triangulate our GPS and figure out where we are, right? So where are we? What's going on in your life, right? So and this is, y'all know how to do this. I'm pretty confident, right? So they feel overwhelmed. They feel directionless. They feel hopeless. So it's like all these questions about, okay, like why do you feel hopeless? Like where does the hopelessness come from? Why don't you have you don't want to ask why questions, but what makes it hard for you to pick a direction to go? And you're going to uncover all kinds of crap. Like, oh, there's no point in trying. Okay, like when did you give up hope? Like when did you learn how to give up hope? You guys know all this stuff, right? Pretty familiar? We good? Okay. So if they lack goals, it's going to be like exploratory work. It's not about directing them anywhere. It's about exploration. So for clients who have overly ambitious goals, what are we going to do for them?
Start with the 25% rule.
Sure. So 25% rule is good. What else? Why are their goals overly ambitious?
I think we would try to make them let them figure out that their goal is actually ambitious.
Yep. Good. So increase insight into overly ambitious goals. Good. I'm pretty confident that you guys are able to do that as well. But why are their goals ambitious? Eli? You figured this out some time ago.
Because they're comparing themselves to others and it's not enough.
All that crap, right? So this is where enter all of the things that you guys are already experts in. Shoulds. Not enough. Comparison. Ahamkar. all this crap comes in. So the key thing here is you've got to deconstruct the idea of should, right? And I think you guys know how to do this. Because what does that mean? Like, or enough? Because like, that's not a thing. Enough is not a thing. Right? And you can make the argument that it is a thing. You can say, okay, I did not get a score high enough to pass the class. Dr. K, clearly that's a thing. I didn't pass the class. Okay, fair enough. So like, enough can absolutely be a thing. There's a reason why there's a word for it. But I would say that most of the times, whether some outcome is enough or not enough, because enough is an outcome orientation. Whether you do something that is enough or not enough is completely, or whether it's enough or not enough is completely independent of what you do. Does that make sense? So I can study every day, or I can study as much as I can, and maybe that'll be not enough. But do I want this to determine how I take action in the present? Or do I want to focus on this and then just hope that this happens? So the problem with the idea of not enough is that as people are like thinking about not enough, it actually paralyzes them from taking action and destroys their motivation. So you really have to deconstruct the idea of like enough and should and all this kind of crap through all of these things, which I know y'all can do. So you kind of do that if they have overly ambitious goals, right? And then on a more practical level, so this is like on a philosophical level, what you need to do as a coach. Oh no, I missed an O. And on a practical level, you can help them set more ambitious goals and be prepared for that resistance, right? And so, like, as soon as you try to use the 25% rule on them, they're going to say it's not enough, but you're going to be ready for them because you know all this stuff. And then you're going to be like, let's talk about that, right? You're going to work through all this crap. Then they're going to set an appropriate goal, and then they're more likely to achieve it. We good? Another key point here is that sometimes people confuse goals with wish lists. I don't know if y'all have ever done this yourselves or you've heard someone else, or where like you start to set a goal for yourself and then you start tacking more on. It's like, I should work out every day and I should eat healthy and I should have a smoothie every morning. And then like goals like quickly like spiral into wish lists. And then it's like everything, when a goal turns into a wish list, you're destroying your frontal lobe's ability to do any of it. It becomes overwhelming. It's too many goals. So you're going to help them kind of scale back. Okay. So number 3. The misdirected goal. So this is the hardest thing about coaching, is that sometimes clients come in and they have the wrong goals. And you may say, Dr. K, that's ridiculous. How can a client have a wrong goal? Isn't it for them to determine? Aren't they the ones to decide? Incorrect. Sometimes our clients are stupid. Let me give you an example. So I had a client that came in one day and said, Dr. K, my boat is sinking. I need a bigger bucket. I need a bigger bucket. This bucket is not big enough to get all the water out of my boat. Can you give me a bigger bucket? And what they need to do is plug the holes. So like, this is where type 1 reasoning comes in again, right? Because it's clear, because the person's logical. If they've got a bigger bucket, they can bail water faster and they'll, like that's what that'll fix it, right? But their goal is coming from like an incorrect understanding of the problem. And this is where you can roll in a bunch of stuff that we've talked about, like Jung's shadow, right? We can talk about things like alexithymia, like psychological defense mechanisms like suppression. We can talk about ahamkar, blind spots, right? Because the ahamkar won't let them see where the real problem is. Oh yeah, like if I'm a narcissist, the problem is that everyone else is like very insensitive to me. People need to be more insensitive to me. It's like everyone around me is an asshole. Everyone around me needs to be nicer. It's just like, I need a bigger bucket. No, the problem is something else. Like, so your job as a coach is to help people access all this crap. Cognitive biases. And I know you've done it. I know all of y'all have done it. Where a client will come in and will be like, we'll say one thing and then you're like, hey, wait a second. What you're saying actually doesn't make any sense. You point out the discrepancy. You point out the cognitive bias. You point out the ambivalence. Right? So, I just need to start drinking after 5 p.m. I just need to not drink early. Well, how do you get to that conclusion? Well, because when I drink after 5 p.m., everything is fine. But when I start early, it's a problem. Whereas like the real problem is like maybe you got a problem with alcohol, you shouldn't be drinking at all. So there are all kinds of things that can result in a misdirected goal. So this is once again where y'all, I'm pretty sure you guys know how to deal with this, right? Do y'all feel comfortable with like people who have misdirected goals? Right? So, and this is where building a therapeutic alliance is really good. This is also where, like, remember as a coach, you're not there to just agree with whatever they say. You're there to challenge them. So with clients who have misdirected goals, like, it's a good place to challenge them once you have an alliance. And you can say, hey, I'm wondering, if maybe there's a different way to think about how to fix this problem. Once again, recruit type 2 reasoning to help them think about, how they could deal with this problem otherwise. Like, what's a creative solution to your problem? Because their solutions are not individualized. They're not based on their own creativity. They're based on what worked for someone on the internet. I watched this person who did this on the internet. This is what worked for them, so that's what I'm going to do. Maybe you have a different problem. Okay? Questions about troubleshooting goals. Or troubleshooting goal setting, I should say. Okay. So, now we're going to talk about one other thing in terms of kind of how to iterate. So we're going to talk about iteration for a second. So our approach for goal setting and motivation at Healthy Gamer is to not achieve your goals. It's to iterate. Success is not our target. Learning is our target. So I don't know that we can succeed, but we can certainly try to learn. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you guys a robust framework for this. But, expect your clients to succeed some and fail some. And then what we're going to do is do kind of like a post-mortem analysis of okay, why did you fail? What got in the way? Things like that. The key thing that I want to share with y'all is a really fascinating other, I guess, scientific principle, for lack of a better term, actually comes from public health, is something called positive deviance. So oftentimes when our clients have goals and they fall short of their goals, their emphasis is on the failure and what they could do better. But the interesting thing is that the recipe to success is not necessarily in what they could do better. It's actually in the times that they already succeeded. So this is a quick story that I'll share with y'all. So these were the people who sort of discovered positive deviance. There were a group of doctors from France and the US that were tasked by the World Health Organization or someone like that to fix malnutrition in rural Vietnam. Really fascinating story. You guys can check out the book, Positive Deviance. So what they did is they went to Vietnam and they sort of made all these arrangements, and the Vietnamese government said okay, our people are malnourished. And so these folks were like, okay, do y'all have food that we can give them? And the Vietnamese government was like, yes. Because the problem to malnourishment is food aid, right? Like if you're in a developing country and people don't have food to eat, GG, you just need food. Just get food. Easy, bro. So then they show up and it turns out that there's been some kind of communication problem or maybe corruption, and the food aid is no longer there. And they've taken sabbaticals and they're traveling to Vietnam. They're going to be there for 6 months. But now they don't have any of the resources that they were supposed to have to fix this food aid problem. And so the Vietnamese government was or whatever, the health department or whatever was we can give you a van, lodging, and a translator. Can you please help us with this problem? Can you please help our population become less malnourished without any food? And so these people were sure, why not? And so the rate of malnutrition amongst pediatric or amongst kids, because it was focused on children, was something like 50%. And so the researchers had this really interesting idea, which is there are 1,000 people in let's say this part of rural Vietnam, and half of them are malnourished. That's terrible. But why aren't the other half malnourished? It's kind of interesting because there's actually a success. There's some people are not malnourished, and what's up with that? And so what they sort of discovered was this principle of positive deviance, which is that if you're trying to figure out how to fix a problem, don't focus on the people who are unsuccessful, or don't focus on your attempts that are failures. Focus on your attempts that are successes. And by exploring why you were successful then and duplicating that, you will actually fix the problem of failure in and of itself. As it turns out, for those of you who are curious, what they discovered is that most of the people are malnourished because they're rice farmers. And so their primary staple of their diet is rice. So they get enough calories, but they just don't get enough like protein and micronutrients and stuff like that. And so what they discovered is that some families, when they're out in the rice fields, there are different kinds of like things that are growing in the rice fields. So you'll get like small like clams and shrimps and things like that. And that some people would literally like have an apron, and anytime they saw like some tiny bit of fish, like a small fish or a clam or like a shrimp or like some kind of, you know, water organism, crustacean, they would scoop it up and stick it in their apron. They also found that this same group of people, that there were certain weeds that would grow in the rice fields that are actually very nutritious, but are considered like poor people's food. So in the southern United States, for example, like if you look at it historically, like collard greens were foods that like slaves would eat because they were considered less desirable. So like, you know, the plantation owners would eat like the desirable vegetables, and then the slaves would eat the collard greens. Collard greens are delicious, by the way. And so if you look at recipes for collard greens, they all involve like, you know, like offcuts of pork and things like that. So you add like a little bit of bacon and like other like types of meat that it's hard to eat, but if you add it to collard greens, makes it delicious. So what they sort of discovered is that there's kind of this social stigma against eating this like nutritious vegetable. And so that's the way in which like half of the population was not malnourished while the other half of the population was. And so by sort of discovering that success and applying it to the other people, by teaching the people, oh, hey, you should scoop up shrimp too. They also did a couple of other interventions, like they set up like a meal plan where like one family would cook every day for like 5 or 6 different people. So they kind of like got together and shared their cooking duties. So they had like one pot of stew that would serve 5 families, and that worked really well too. So they discovered a couple of other things. But essentially, the idea behind positive deviance is when you're working with a client, our tendency, you know, if let's say they, you know, did yoga for 3 days and then like failed for 4 days, and their target was yoga every day. QD means daily, medical abbreviation, okay? So then what we want to do is we can say, oh, why did you fail? Like what happened? What got in the way? But equally important is asking them, you know, why did you succeed? What were the circumstances for the first 3 days that allowed you to succeed? And what changed on day 4? So oftentimes I've noticed this bias in how people solve problems is that everyone focuses on the negative in problem solving, right? If you kind of think about it, I do this kind of stuff in all dimensions, whether it's investment banking, working with traders, working with physicians around like you know, bad outcomes with patient care, even in esports. Because what everyone focuses on esports is the games that they lost, not the games that they win. Do you ever watch replays of the games that you crushed the opponent? Not usually, right? Usually if you want to learn, we focus on your mistakes. So recruit positive deviance and focus on how your clients are able to succeed and duplicate that process to troubleshoot goals. Questions? Okay. Last one. I recognize I'm out of time. Dimensions of goals. So this we're going to run through very quickly. There'll be a lot more information in the manual, okay? So when we think about a goal, much like our original diagram, there's a lot of value to be gained out of something like motivation and actually breaking apart motivation into multiple things. Because there isn't like one motivation lever, but when we break it apart into different things, we can like adjust the levers in different ways. So if we think about even something like language, so the more letters we have, the more we're able to like compose different words, right? So increasing the resolution on which we can act, increasing the precision at which we can make changes will lead to better outcomes. So there's also like a balancing influence in that, you know, at some point we decided that a collection of letters should make a word instead of, you know, having one unique symbol for each word, which is what hieroglyphics is, which is also like if you look at, you know, Chinese characters or kanji, if you look at emojis, right? So there's like an interesting balance between like what's the resolution of like letters versus symbols. And what we can see is if you look at something like emojis, you can communicate things very effectively by like increasing the precision. As we expand the number of emojis at our disposal, we become more efficient communicators. So what we're going to do is expand the precision with which we look at a goal. And so here are the dimensions that I would encourage y'all to think about with a client and work on, okay? So the first is the target. So this is what we kind of think of traditionally as the goal, like become an Olympic gold medalist, right? So what are the ways in which we can adjust the target? So the goal here is that each of these dimensions can be explored and adjusted to help us attain success, okay? So should we change our target? So this is where the 25% rule comes in, okay? Second thing is, what are the actions? So this is also where like operationalizing comes in, because oftentimes we set goals that are not actually actions. So to explicitly take a goal, a target, and reduce it to actions, we'll operationalize, we'll make things easier, abstract to concrete, all that good stuff. So this is all stuff that hopefully y'all will understand. It's just an organized framework that y'all can use with a client. Okay, so what are the actions that we can take? Third dimension is exploring examples of success and failure, right? So very practically, what you can do with a client is you can ask them, you know, if they set a goal for themselves and they come in next week and they say, I succeeded, I did it for the first 3 days and then I forgot and then I didn't do it again. So we can explore that. Okay, how do you feel about that? You know, what do you understand about what got in the way? What made it hard for you to do it the last 4 days? It's also kind of bizarre because it seems like you were crushing it for 72 hours. How do you understand that, right? So that's positive demons. We just talked about that, but it's still a part of our framework. You can explore examples of success and failure. And the key things is what are the key takeaways? From these successes and failures. That once you make these key takeaways conscious, you have increased your client's ability to like engage in them again, right? So we're going to move along the Dunning-Kruger curve by asking this question. So this is also an opportunity to explore resistance, right? So like when you fail, like there may be like resistance there. Could be, and then once again, emotions, ego, etc. A good question here is what gets in the way? So you don't want to ask the question, why did you fail? You want to ask the question, you know, it seems like you were able to do yoga the first 3 days. What got in the way the 4th day? And so even if you think about that question, instead of them saying, oh, I'm a failure, right? Like instead of letting them retreat to their identity and it was doomed to fail and all this kind of stuff, I am ... You're raising awareness about an external factor that could be influencing them, which then they can control. So for example, what you may discover is I wanted to do yoga, but I actually like overslept because I stayed up way too late. And that's really interesting, right? Because then you've sort of discovered, oh, the problem isn't boosting your willpower. The problem is if you want to do yoga consistently, you need to fix your sleep schedule. So it could be an issue of a misdirected goal. Dimension number 4. Okay, so I had actually split these in the framework. I'd actually split these into 2 different things. So examples of success and exploring failure, and then going down the route of resistance. Okay, so that's number 4. Okay, so there's some things here that we're going to include for the sake of completeness, which is not really within the scope of coaching. So then if we also think about it, there are physiologic factors. Right, so people could have circadian rhythm disorders. They could have vitamin D deficiency. They could have, they could be hypothyroid. They could have testosterone deficiency. They may be vitamin B deficient. There are all kinds of physiologic factors. They may be in a high inflammatory state, which makes people like feel kind of sluggish and makes it hard to work. There's a lot of physiology that goes into motivation, a little bit outside of the scope of coaching, but I just include it here for completeness. This is also where we can think about things like sleep and diet and exercise as being physiologic factors. Psychological stressors. So when you have a goal, I know this is going to sound really simple, but I don't think that people really appreciate this. Everyone sort of intellectually understands it, but they don't really understand it on an implicit level, and they're not consciously aware of it, that if you're overwhelmed or stressed or had a bad interaction at work, that's going to impact your RAM, right? So like we all have a limited amount of RAM, working memory. We all have like limited amounts of like energy in our frontal lobe. We have limited amounts of willpower. And what you'll see time and time again is like, when people get sober, for example, oftentimes there's a psychological stressor, like their ex started texting them again, which sort of precipitates the relapse. So there are all kinds of psychological stresses that can contribute to difficulty in achieving your goals. Okay, so you can ask them, what's been stressful for you over the last week? When things get stressful, how do you think that will affect your ability to meet your goals? Because generally speaking, the conclusion they tend to come to is, oh, I suck at this. If I was better, if I could manage stress better, then I would succeed. So the failure is mine. But by sort of pointing out explicitly that there are psychological stressors which will make their life hard, you allow them to do things like forgive themselves, demonstrate self-compassion. You also give them axes. So if I think the problem is that I am a failure and that I can't handle stress well, that's not actionable. Whereas if you reframe the problem, you take that misdirected goal and you help people recognize that you're human, and that if you get stressed, it's hard to work out. You're going to stress eat more. Maybe the solution is not to increase your willpower, because I don't know how to do that. But maybe the solution is to set better boundaries with people who create stress in your life. And that if you really want to work out every day, the first step is to actually set boundaries with people who are very stressful. So psychological stresses. Next thing is social influences. I kind of bled into this with the last one. But I think it's actually very important to explicitly acknowledge what the social influences towards your goal setting are. Who are the people that you hang out with? So there's an entire video about this in Dr. K's guide on Sangha, which is in the meditation path and the path of accomplishment. So, like if what do your roommates inspire you to do? How do your parents affect your motivation? And there's some interesting revelations here, which not a lot of people realize. Because parents think they're being supportive, right? They'll go to their kid and they'll say, oh my God, you have so much potential. You can do anything. You're so smart. Oh my God, you're so smart. You're so brilliant. You have so much potential. How do you think that affects a kid's motivation?
Makes it worse.
Absolutely, right? The parent thinks that they're helping. They're actually making things worse. Oh my God, you're such a wonderful boy. I don't know why you can't find a girlfriend. You're so handsome, and you're so wonderful, and you're so sweet. You're such a catch. I don't know why the girls just don't like you. I don't understand what's going on. Well, first of all, Mom, I'm gay. So that's part of it. Anyway, so it's kind of interesting, but I think once again, the goal is to consciously make people aware. So you have your friends, right? And so but what do your friends actually motivate you to do? When you spend more time with your friends, how do your behaviors evolve? When you hang out with your friends, do you play more video games? Eat healthy food? What happens? What's the influence? Explicitly understand what's the influence of different people in your life. And even in cases of romantic partners, right? This is a really surprisingly common example. So sometimes you'll have a married couple, and one member of the married couple is motivated to change their diet. And then they start eating healthy. And what does the other member of the married couple do?
They start eating healthy too.
You would hope so, if only that were the case. Can anyone imagine the opposite?
They feel resentful.
Absolutely. Right? So sometimes, Steve, sometimes you're correct. I tend to be kind of pessimistic, so I see the dark side of things. And what tends to happen is the other partner feels ashamed, right? Because it's like, I still want to eat my donut. And there you are eating oatmeal. It's like, I just want a donut. And then I feel bad about myself because you're sitting there eating oatmeal and I'm sitting here eating a donut. I feel like an idiot. And then I resent you. And then I start to sabotage you. And then I start to get in the way. Happens all the time, right? And you may see this kind of thing like even within your like online friends, right? I love them. But sometimes they're like, oh no, man, like play one more. Don't quit. Play one more. Like we're going to crush them. Like, let's do it, bro. Don't quit. Don't go to sleep yet. I'm not going to sleep yet. What's wrong with you putting together your life? Screw that. Let's play. So social influences, right? Thinking about, so a couple of explicit questions here. Who holds you back? Who pulls you forward? And there are a couple of other revelations to be had here as well. So the first is that sometimes the people that make you feel bad are actually the ones that pull you forward. I certainly had this experience at Harvard, where I felt like, holy crap, these people are amazing. And every time I talk to them, I'm like, you did what? You have how many publications? That's insane. You have a picture with Barack Obama because you served in the health department and helped him pass the Affordable Care Act? Like, that's crazy, bro. Right? Like, that's what you wind up with. And you may feel some amount of, like, resistance to hanging out with those people, but helping your clients understand who are the people in their lives that pull them forward and what's the resistance to hanging out with them can actually be very helpful. Next thing is environmental influences. Okay? And by environmental influences, this one's pretty straightforward. But it's things like access to cell phone. So like, where is your cell phone when you're trying to work? Is it in your pocket? Is it easily accessible? Is it locked? You know, what's the status of your notifications? When do you get distracted? How do you get distracted? Where do you study? Is it the library? Is it at home? What are the environmental influences that are going to lead to success? Once again, going back to the working out example, right? So we kind of asked people like gym or home. That's key. It's crucial. So a lot of these dimensions are baked into everything that you guys are already doing, which is, by the way, part of the reason that y'all have the outcomes that you do, despite never having had this training, because it's all baked in. Y'all are already doing it. But by giving you this framework, hopefully it'll help you be a little bit more focused and increase the value that you bring to your clients. So right now, after spending 8 weeks with one of y'all lovely people, our clients feel 25% more in control of their lives. That's awesome. 25% control in 8 weeks is like really amazing. No one ever feels 100%, right? It's just not going to happen. So there's some issues with the data. So 25% is actually objectively very good. And so as we sort of teach you these kinds of things, my hope is that we'll be able to bump y'all from like 25 to 30%. And then the last thing, this is kind of weird. This isn't really so much for the average client, but matters more in terms of like performance coaching and things like that, is I like to think about stakeholders. So like, what are the different stakeholders for the goal that you're trying to achieve? And this is kind of important because this is kind of goes back to the married couple example, but sometimes for the goals that you have, there are actually like other people who don't want those goals, right? So if you're trying to get promoted, for example, that's a great example of like doing a stakeholder analysis is very helpful to help your clients recognize that there are things outside of them that are going to be influencing them, and actually consciously thinking about those things can help you adapt your goal and adapt your actions to accommodate for those stakeholders. This is definitely something that we'll talk more about. So as we sort of, we're probably going to do like a relaunch of performance coaching at some point. We'll talk a lot more about this. But it's just, I'm kind of including it here for the sake of completeness. Okay, so I've run way over time. I apologize. I wanted to go fast.